Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Massimo Del Barba from Corriere della Sera, and I will be with you for the next 2.5 hours for the fourth edition of Green Talk, created by Miglia. This year, we'll be talking about designing the new mobility. It will be 2.5 hours of building and giving contribution and giving interviews and giving a lot of news about what we want to produce today, what we want to build today, which is like a kind of a toolbox on how to intercept the changes we want to make for mobility in a complete way, to create mobility sustainable mobility and private and public, and how to design the cities in the future. We're going to do this with a series of very important people who will be speaking. But now, before starting our morning, we would like to have the official greetings from Emilio Del Bono, who is the mayor of Brescia. Mille Miglia is not just history. It is not just the speed. It is not just the excitement of a race. It also tells the story of automotive, thus the story of technology, the story of the workforce, and the story of the cultural changes that have taken place in the area. Now Mille Miglia is doing a very intelligent operation, which is to project itself into the future, the 21st century. The century in which, once again, there will be radical changes in motoring and the automotive production chain. To have placed Mille Miglia within this idea of the races, also those of electric cars, and the change of energy that will become one of the decisive points of the 21st century, unfortunately not only from the labor point of view, but it is also becoming so with a great battle and a great geopolitical world war. And yet it shows that Mille Miglia is there. Mille Miglia stands in history, and in history it also looks to the future, thus a very important signal for our land. Now, after having heard the institutional greetings from the mayor of Brescia, Emilio Del Bono, now we will listen to Angelo Sticchi Damiani, who is the president of ACI. Good morning. The problem of determining whether or not mobility is sustainable arises from the contrast between humankind's own desire for mobility and concern about the negative impacts it brings about. In fact, mobility, by enabling individual travel and access to goods services, turns out to be fundamental to the social economic development of our society. The way in which it is currently carried out results in a number of negative impacts on the environment, safety, health, economy, and historical and artistic heritage. In addition, the current transportation system depends almost exclusively on a single non-renewable energy source, which is oil, with serious international policy consequences. In the concept of sustainable development, there are several definitions that all agree that economic and social progress and environmental protection, which are two inseparable factors. The application of the concept of sustainable development to transportation policy is a somewhat delicate task because there is no universally known definition of sustainable mobility. Several attempts have been made to formalize the definition of this concept. In general, a transportation system can be defined as sustainable when it provides easy access to places, goods, and services, and meets the needs of different categories in society and for different generations. It is designed in a way that is compatible with the health and safety of the population. It promotes community education and participation in transportation decisions. It involves experts from different sectors in an integrated planning process that allows efficient use of land and natural resources without destroying habitat and biodiversity. It respects environmental integrity and promotes economic well-being. The concept of sustainable mobility is often misunderstood. In fact, most planners and practitioners simply add the adjective sustainable to discourses and projects, already determined and according to other logics, reducing the innovative scope of this conceptual proposal to generic concern for the environment. It thus happens that the sustainability of transport is usually equated with the concept of environmental protection, forgetting almost completely its social and economic aspects, which are limited to problems related to safety and health. The same attention towards the environment is also considered only as an element, as an ex post, also as a mitigation of the effects that are negative in the decisions of politics, investments. For us, ACI, the sustainable mobility has 4 conditions which augments the safety of all the users of the road, including, above all, the most vulnerable, which reduce the environmental impact and which is also quicker. It can be more convenient and, above all, more economic, and everybody can have access. If not everybody can use the future forms of mobility, of innovative mobility, then it will not be a real mobility that is sustainable, but only one that is privileged and at the availability of those who are able to access it. A safe mobility, a clean one, an economic and effective one is the right for everybody. And this does not mean that only a few thousands can have access to electric cars, as it is not a car sharing which is can be used mainly by the young generations or the more dynamic generations. It doesn't integrate better with the other forms of transport. For the abilities, the experiences, the useful knowledges to realize a concrete transport which is integrated between public, bus, taxis, which is condivided, which is shared among cars, motorbikes, and bicycles. We have to start from the necessity of the mobility of today, analyzing the enormous knowledge and patrimony of data that we possess, the so-called big data, to identify the solutions which are more attached to simplicity, economy, and without causing too much effort and complications. We have to act in different directions, including a unique framework for reference where the sustainability can be founded on 3 pilasters, which can result in the safety for ethical reasons and for social costs associated to accidents, respect for the environment, and not only the environmental pollution, but also noise, the volume, and the intrusive of the vehicles. To be very, very, let's say, short, we must go back to planning the cities and the solutions and there must be a shift, a world shift, which will have to be also collective. The Italian park is the oldest in Europe. The average age of passenger cars is 11 years and 6 months, and as many as 4.5 million vehicles are over 23 years old. Pre-Euro 5 vehicles, that is, from Euro 0 to Euro 4, account for 2 out of 3 vehicles. About 21 million passenger cars are more than 9 years old. Impressive figures. A situation that leads to serious problems, both in terms of the safety of our roads and the quality of the air that we breathe and the environment. Euro 6 diesels, for example, pollute 28 times less than a Euro 1. Euro 4, 50% less than a Euro 3. A Euro 4 gasoline emits 172% less CO2 than a Euro 1. Renewing the vehicle fleet, therefore, was a priority before the COVID-19 pandemic, and it is even more so today, since safety and environment are added to the worrisome repercussions for the lockdown that has had and is having an entire Italian automotive supply chain, from production to marketing, with possible heavy repercussions on employment and industrial capacity for the entire automotive sector. It should be recalled that in Italy, the automotive industry and trade employs about 400,000 people for more than 200 billion in turnover in 2019. Thanks to the constant evolution of technologies and the natural growth of car vehicle electrification and the spontaneous choices of the market, progressively, without forcing, it is possible to achieve a new sustainable mobility that safeguards universal right to mobility, especially metropolitan areas, and ensures a significant improvement in air quality and the resilience of the strong automotive sector in Italy. The eco-rational transition of mobility will make it possible to achieve a containment of CO2 emissions on levels close to the target set by Europe at 2030. Further explainable acceleration of this path may come from supporting the scrapping of old cars from Euro 0 to Euro 3, the most polluting, with safer and more advanced cars, such as, of course, the very latest Euro 6D, and as well as the recent and affordable Euro 4 and Euro 5. In recent years, the more pressing need to reduce environmental impact in transportation has led us to focus attention on the energy and technological scenario of mobility, and its prospects has had multiple aspects to it, some of which highlight opportunities, but also unknown and criticalities. On the other hand, the persistence of traditional energy and technological sources of propulsion, however, increasingly environmentally performing and now well established. And on the other, there is a rapid revolution of innovative frontier technologies, whose actual timing of market penetration, however, is linked to multiple knots still to be resolved. What will be the technology of the future, or the possible hierarchy of energy sources intended to fuel the attraction of the automobile and more generally of the transportation system with a view to maximizing environmental goals? The debate is open. At present, according to many observers, on the basis of in-depth studies, which the ACI itself, through the Caracciolo Foundation and the Center Studies conducting, it seems reasonable to assume in a still long-term perspective the coexistence of a plurality of energy sources and propulsion technologies made possible by innovation, both in the sphere of traditional sources and those of the more recent development. Thus, one thinks of mobility in which oil and gas and biofuels, biomethane, electric and renewables, hydrogen, and other still sources can fruitfully coexist and live together. In other words, it does not seem possible in the state of art to clearly favor one or more of the different technologies, since even those that are most frequently cited as optimal solutions actually have some counterindications that are not easily or quickly resolved. It is necessary to prefer environmentally friendly means of transportation to spread better knowledge on the issue of emissions related to the use of different fuels, and to adopt behaviors that respect both people and the environment, even when using environmentally friendly means to promote the accessibility and inclusiveness of everything. While the number of people choosing forms of soft mobility or microelectric mobility to get around the city is increasing, the car remains the main means of transportation. Therefore, it is important, in addition to compliance with the rules by all, the implementation of adequate infrastructure in order to help significantly and quickly reduce the polluting impact of mobility. The first proposal is to introduce incentives to replace an old car with a newer used one from Euro 4 onwards, safer and less polluting, favoring those who cannot afford a new car. The used-on-used incentive, even between private individuals, would not only drastically reduce emissions of greenhouse gases and pollutants, but also the likelihood of accidents with serious consequences. Purely by way of example, in replacing old vehicles, Euro 0 to Euro 3, with used but newer vehicles from Euro 4 and up, or new ones, tax relief could be provided in transfers of ownership through an appropriate remodeling of the provincial registration tax, the famous IPT. The possible reduction in tax revenue would be absorbed by an increase in the number of ownership transfers. On the other hand, by the increase in VAT revenue on vehicle transactions in detail, one could reduce the IPT by 50% for the purchase of new vehicles or for used vehicles. Euro 4, Euro 5, Euro 6, used for used incentive. The topic obviously needs adequate study in order to assess, balance the different needs at stake. As a second measure referring to the old age of the current car fleet, it is also considered appropriate the obligation of annual overhaul for vehicles over 10 years old. In particular, provide a kind of certified sticker that guarantees on the safety and emissions of the vehicle. These certifications and a higher quality of inspections should also be provided for newer vehicles. As a third measure, again related to the age of the vehicle fleet, also in light of the recent driving restrictions introduced by regions and local governments, and that of providing for a regulatory intervention that harmonizes the restriction measures at the Italian level with the same rules throughout the country. In addition, in relation to the composition of the Italian car fleet, it is appropriate in driving restrictions, particularly in vehicle categories, only categories 0, 1, 2, and 3 should be penalized. Finally, a fourth measure, mandatory use of the AEB, autonomous emergency braking, driver assistance system for new vehicles, and use of aftermarket driver assistance devices for vehicles that are not new or not equipped with such a system, all aimed at increasing the safety of the vehicle fleet. And the autonomous emergency braking system automatically intervenes in case of a sudden obstacle in the vehicle's path, in case the driver is distracted or is not applying the brake. With this device that has been mandatory by law, for example, in the state of Israel, there have been reductions in accident rates of more than 30%. From all these measures, we expect a renewed and therefore more sustainable car fleet, a reduction in the social costs of mobility attributable to more safety, a reduction in traffic accidents, more quality of life, a reduction in harmful emissions and pollutants, fewer deaths from lung cancer due to harmful emissions from vehicular traffic. We also need to review mobility from a sustainable and eco-friendly perspective at all levels, always keeping our safety and the safety of other road users in the foreground. If instead of thinking about where technologies take us, we look at where we would like to lead them, in fact, we would probably regain that ability to design the future that we sometimes seem to have lost. While this is valid and in general, it is especially important when it comes to automobiles. Rethinking the car does not, in fact, mean merely rethinking a transportation tool. It means redefining through it a large part of our social model. Thanking very much Mr. Angelo Sticchi Damiani. I would like to introduce Aldo Bonomi, the president of ACI Brescia, onto the stage with me now. Now, the fourth edition of this Green Talk designed by Miglia.
First of all, I would like to say good afternoon to everybody and thank you for everybody who's here and who's following us today. I'd like to say that Miglia is the symbol, is the fourth year that it's being organized, this Green Talk, and we think it's very important that, like Brescia as a province, but also Miglia, would like to give a great emphasis on the change that in the future that there'll be.
It is an occasion, as we were saying before, not only to communicate, but also an industrial opportunity to show which technologies to put on the field. I'm asking you because you're an
Yes, of
industrialist.
course, yes. The idea was born years ago when the president of Miglia was Franco Gusali Belletta, and it was born linking to 1927 when it started. And also starting from then, it became the Industrial Revolution and change, and also change in the cars. And also in Brescia, we'd like to change, and we'd like to take it from there, the change in the automobilism and combustion, and we'd like to be, and to take on the green side of it, this is very important for these kind of cars. This new kind of life, which is reserved to us, and also to the people who are following us, this was imposed to allow people to speak about it, to help, and the industries to
now there will be during the Miglia, the actual race, the traditional historic race, there will be electric cars which will try to carry out the same route as the other cars. Obviously, you know that the batteries they don't have the same performance.
This is no doubt at all. And we're not actually saying anything new. There's lots of difficulties. The car companies are not ready yet to affront this problem in the future. There are no infrastructures, but it's ahead. It's ahead to the future. And like Miglia, and most of all like Aci, which is the patron of Miglia, and has 100% of the quotes of Miglia, we have to give this development so that also the Automobile Club can participate, as it is already doing so. We know that we must do this change. We're trying to do this change, and this Green Talk will help us to give this push, to speak about this continuously, and to give hints for a better future.
Thank you very much, President of Aci Brescia, Aldo Bonomi. Now I'd like to call Beatrice Sautini, the President of Miglia SRL. Good morning, Mrs. Sautini.
Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to wish you all a welcome here today. Thank you for being here. This is my first Green Talk. And of course, I must thank who was before me and who idealized and support this initiative, and to find that I'm completely in agreement with and a supporter. Miglia SRL must preserve the traditions. It must preserve and keep faith to the values and the cultures which has started from the beginning of last century to the most beautiful race in the world, bringing to the modern world and, of course, taking it to the future. Therefore, our job is to absolutely show the present, show the speed, the courage, and the progress of today and sustainability, the speed and the capacity to intercept and to be prompt to teach the signals from all sides, where they arrive from the community, from institutions, and the courage and capacity to make new roads, to produce processes, products, innovative processes. Also, when the idea are similar to a dream.
I imagine that it is very complicated to organize a race like that we will see in a few days' time. But it's also true that, as Aldo Bonomi was saying, it's intuitive, but also 60, 70, 80 years ago, this kind of race was an occasion to speak about innovation.
Of course, this type of race was the materialization, the phenomenalization of the want to progress and to come out of the First World War, the birth of the industry, the birth of infrastructures. The sense and the meaning of Miglia is not only that of a car race, beautiful, but it was the experimenting of whatever was happening in those years and whatever was developing, and to see the vision and to have the vision of what would happen in the future.
Thank you very much, Beatrice Sautini, President of Miglia SRL. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and have a
And
good
now,
day.
last but not least, Franco Gusali Beretta, the President of Confindustria Brescia. Good morning, President.
Good
I would like
afternoon,
to ask
everybody.
you as well to ask and give greetings to listening to us online.
Yes, as Confindustria Brescia, it's a great pleasure to be here to stimulate this confrontation that brings the voice of the industries and most of all of the automotive sector to Brescia. It's very important because, as who spoke before me said, Miglia has always been a great race, but it's also been the person that, or whoever pulled forward into Italy, but also in our structures. And it's brought us forward, and it has made it been to have great choices, especially with the Confindustria. We cannot decline that there's a big debate. Many businessmen are trying to understand where to go in the future, and to bring to Brescia through Miglia the debate on what the future shall be. It's very important, especially for the cars, for us who are citizens, for people who are passionate of Miglia, but also for the industrial section. And now I represent the sector and the automotive, and not only. I think that this debate is fundamental to really help to find the solutions, the real solutions, that according to us are not only those that we can see now, but we must leave freedom to choose and to find innovation and to have more performing issues to bring new solutions and sustainability for the future.
This now is a debate which definitely is global, but also the territories, especially the territories with this industrial vocation, such as the one in Brescia, has a great role in this kind of game.
Yes, surely, because the companies are many, there are many workers, and today we are trying to the center of attention the opportunity to show that Italy remains a fundamental player in this sector, which is very important for the automotive world. It would be terrible if what was constructed in the last 100 years, if it was destroyed for something which could be a simplification. We don't at all for simplification. We want innovation, and thanks to research. And this could be done also thanks to the collaboration with research centers, universities. I know we'll hear Magnifico Tira from University of Brescia. And so Brescia, 100 years ago, had a very important role, and I hope today it will be able to give a better future vision with neutrality and bring various solutions to make this come true.
Sustainability and for the environment, but also for the economy. Thank you very much, Franco Beretti, Gusali Beretta, from the President. Now we will start our panels, but first we will do it with a speech given by Eremete Realacci.
Good afternoon. I'm sorry I'm not able to be here with you today, because it's always important to be able to discuss and to exchange ideas. This is the 4th edition, and the catalyzer of energy and intuition, but also of companies. And we need this to understand which direction in which direction the automotive world is going. What role can it have in Italy? We know that it's a very important role. There's about 7% of the new 3% of the turnover of production, and this is bringing about great changes that should be minimized, but not be feared, because respect to other sectors, other than being delicate technologically, it calls into question very serious problems. For example, employment. In other sectors, for example, it's simpler to understand. If in energy you move to renewables, there is more work, there's more widespread work, and there's more relationship with the territories. In this field, this is not given. This has always been right, in my opinion, to push not so much in incentives, but incentives can play a role if they are not scattershot. If they make the direction well understood, when for business support in the technological change, which is necessary, so that in Italy and in Europe, but in short, we care especially about Italy right now, because it can play, continue to play, and resume to play an absolute leading role, which it is able to do. There is an Italian savoir-faire, and from the Brescia Observatory, it is easy to understand than from other places that have all the conditions to establish itself in the world. I read in the past few days that last year, made in Italy in the United States altogether increased by 50%. And we were about to open the future fair in Milan, which in the world's largest exhibition in the sector, and again in that sector, Italy is going ahead. But the same, it's also true in many sectors related to mechatronics and machine tools. Well, we need to be able to have a strong say in the automotive world. And we have to do it starting from what makes us unique: an ability to innovate, often little kept in the network, because the ability on this, Simbilla works a lot. It is absolutely excellence, but often struggle in this network and push that comes a lot from the companies of this territory. I don't say this, but if I think of the role that Brescia Metallurgy has in the European sphere with respect to the circular economy, we are far, by far, the European superpower of the circular economy in the recovery of raw materials and in the production cycles. I think, for example, the role of Feralpi has also been very, very strong investment that it is making on renewable sources to produce a lower priced energy, and at the same time orientated into the direction of Europe indicates. Because when Europe chose to bet everything already before the pandemic with the Green New Deal, but even more so after, with a push that it is also reinforced by the war triggered by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. On three areas: cohesion, the green transition, and digital. Many interpreted this as an attitude due to reasons, if you will, for a real push. I see it differently, of course. We need to fight climate change, to deal with climate crisis, keep countries and communities together and leave no one behind. Push on innovation, but this is also the key to make our economy stronger and more competitive in all sectors. And even in the automotive world, which has a lot to say, we need to start playing a role again that can be stronger even than in the past. For example, I think in the Giulia factory, which is batteries, that was announced in Termoli, when I think of innovation, I think of the ability to cross innovation and beauty. In this, Miglia can play a very, very important role, because I also happen to say in one of the previous meetings, changes are not notarized or processes. They're not algorithms. They need a drive, a passion, a will, which is reinforced by beautiful stories, by the stories. The author Paul Auster of the New York trilogy said that stories happen only in the past. Mille Miglia is a great, beautiful Italian story, and that the Mille Miglia presides through attention and change through the focus on electric mobility that is asserting itself sometimes even more stronger than one might think, even credible. I frankly see Tesla in the stock exchanges worth more than all 7 of the major car companies in the world. And I have some doubt, I must say. However, this is what happens. This is the question that's there, and is the question that Italy can give a positive answer to. A great American filmmaker, Frank Capra, was actually born in Italy. He was born in a small town, Bisaquino, in Sicily. He emigrated, as happened to millions of Italians, to search for fortune. He was chasing a hope in the United States, and he became Frank Capra with a life path that was not easy. And he once uttered a very American phrase, however, it's useful to use at this moment. Frank Capra said, amateurs play to please when the weather is good. Professionals play to win when the storm rages. Well, we have too many storms right now in Italy, where professionals play to make the future win, to make our country win, to make communities win, to build a world where it is more pleasant to live in. It is what we need, and the Mille Miglia can help. And Mille Miglia can really help.
Well, thank you, Mr. Eremete Ralacci, who is the president of the Foundation of Simbola. Some very important points have been touched and been spoken to about Beralacci, and definitely we'll have the occasion to be able to speak about them during this debate. Now we are starting our panels, our first panel, our first block, which is now going to speak about the most interesting part concerning the financial part of sustainable mobility, the challenge of the technological part of the electrical vehicles. Now we're going to speak to Massimo Leonardo from Pricewater. Welcome, Massimo.
Thank you.
I know that you have a presentation.
I know you have a presentation.
So I will let you speak, and then I will ask you something at the end.
Thank you. First of all, I'm a consultant who manages, if you want, it's the kind of third person. My colleagues who come afterwards will show me this. When they told me to come here and speak at Mille Miglia, I thought it was a wonderful occasion, because in the industry, the most important necessity is to try and understand and to imagine the client. So events like this are very important, because the operative energy people as well need to have a customer experience, and they still have to invent it. The challenges are very much, and there are a lot. If you look at the ecosystem of the automobile system, our way to see this, car makers. The other side is the energetic world, the companies. And then, of course, there's a series of technological series which are fundamental to change this paradigm of mobility. And I work with both. In this way, you must try and see the client who has to imagine. Car makers have the challenge and the need to think about a product which is to be substituted. There are costs, because electric cars cost much more, which is quite obvious. The scale that we have right now is not comparable to the traditional cars. The key point is the battery. The battery has a cost, which is still very high, but it will probably decrease. But these batteries are under the magnifying glass to see their performance. The clients have to understand the range anxiety They have this anxiety not to have enough capacity or enough energetic capacity to go from A to B. And as we've often seen, the psychological problem. And then on the other side, we have the energetic companies. They have peculiarities, also national peculiarities, because when we buy a car, we have more in common, other clients globally. When we go and recharge, there are paradigms that are really rational. Think just about how to privately recharge in your house, or the necessity to go and recharge in a public infrastructure. For all these people who don't have private garages, if we look at Europe, the front rower is Norway, because many years ago they put so much money into this public situation. We have habits that here in Italy are completely different. Italy, in this moment, has 25,000 points to charge. It must grow more. This is one of the most critical points, and we need to approach the market, because until we don't have places to go and quickly charge, until we don't have these recharging along the highways, along the roads, in the most important streets, but until we don't have recharging stations quick inside the towns in strategic positions, a whole sector will not be able to be approached because we don't have the infrastructure. We have to create the system where the consumer can easily go from one place to another and charge as easily and quickly as possible. Like in the beginning when we had phones, my Nokia took 4 days to charge. But now today, it's much quicker. It's much quicker. Consumer must change, must definitely change. And they must also be able to show that the consumer is not worse than he was before. He's different, but not different, but he's better now than he was before. You must be able to associate the world with the electric world, but you must also be able to envisage the future.
Now I'd like to ask you a question, which is obviously a bit of a difficult question, but this is my job as a journalist. Is there maybe not a problem in the terms that we use often? We say, in order to simplify, we say sustainable mobility, that there are synonyms. At the end, they are not the same thing. In reality, electric mobility is just a mix of a big salad, big bouillabaisse.
Yes, of course. The electric mobility obviously creates mobility, and also for the environment, but you actually speak about intelligent, smart mobility. So it's very vast. It takes a lot. It's divided. You speak about the reduction of traffic, intelligent features. The smart mobility is very, very vast. And there's a lot of innovations that you'll see in the next few years. However, I think to not get lost in these concepts, it's also interesting to understand the filter 55. There are many documentations that you can find in Italy that there is industrial politics, but also in Europe, but also in Asia, and also in the United States. We have to start to identify the politics.
So there are some drivers which it's useless to try and invent other kind of things. Technology is the road which has been marked.
In our way to see it, yes, it's already very complex. So the first step to the transition, it will take 10 years. It's not in 2030 when we finish the business plan that we'll think it will be there. It's about 5, 10, 8 years. We are speaking tens of 10 years. There's many things to substitute. And then we also have to understand the autonomous cars.
Thank you very much, Massimo Leonardo from PricewaterhouseCoopers. And now we will go into the actual important part of our interviews. As I had said before, there is the first block, which is called Infrastructure and Finance, the e-mobility future. And I would like Dr. Essa From NLX Way, Elisabetta Ripa.
Good afternoon.
Both Mr. Realacci, both Mr. Leonardo, both anticipated the questions that I was going to say. The theme is fundamental in order to try and push this type of question. It's always this usual, the usual kind of the egg and the hen. First we have to ask the question, or we have to, first we have to create the demand, or we have to push the product.
We see it is that the recharging infrastructure is necessary but not enough. Like all the great innovations that presuppose an infrastructure of support, it's necessary to have long foresight and to anticipate the questions that will arrive, that the market will eventually propose, in like the telecommunications in the past and the great innovations that we have always been like witnesses to in the past 10 years. As usual, infrastructure is habilitating. We have to look to the future with optimism and looking at investment and allowing the diffusion of the electric cars to find their space in our country, like has happened in other countries in Europe, as we heard before. We are always a little bit behind, a little bit in the tail of Europe. We're always a little bit slow to embrace new changes, but once we do it with great.
In NLX Way, it's a new company. So this demonstrates also how and in which way Enel believes in the challenge.
Yes, absolutely, because we think that we have to anticipate the market. We have invented a division which is completely based on the electric mobility in other 13 countries of the world. So in here, we are a global entity, and we are focalized to accelerate this transition with the idea, as we've already heard from Realacci, that it's very important to work synergically in the world, in just transition, using extensive properties which are found in all the charging stations, an acceleration of the digitalization, which is fundamental so that the infrastructures can work, and also to speak to all the automotive communities and the electric cars, and also to electrify also the consumption. It is important to reach the targets of sustainability and have zero carbon emission. As a group Enel, we have established as a great target.
It's a challenge which is also phygital, which I find a horrible word, but in the sense that there's a lot of infrastructure, but there's also the data that you are a manager of coming from the TLC. You are a TLC manager.
Yes, the digital is pervasive in all industries. In the automotive world, it was the first change that the automotive had to front. Today, our cars are always more smartphones, as they say, with wheels, as they say. So it's very important. The mobility, the electrical mobility, is a change in the change of the automotive world into digitalization of the sector and also electrification. It's very important to have competence and different kinds of competences that will bring about great emphasis on innovation and digital, and to show this transformation. Innovation is, as usual, it creates discontinuity, and I'm sure that the transition in this electrical world will bring about great opportunities for our company, for our country, and new working places. It will be very important.
The technologies connected are also usually technology that is dangerous. I'm referring to the knot of the cybersecurity. As many say, it's a problem of communication, because the best result that people can have of a strategy of cybersecurity is zero. So when we go back to the actual basics, what you receive
Exactly.
you receive zero.
And so to get this result to annul the risk, we must work in all sectors, especially to ensure the cybersecurity, and especially to show a maximum standard. It's very critical what we are organizing, and allows the mobility in all sectors, especially in the emergency sectors. In fact, the connected infrastructures must speak with the grid, with the network, so as to be able to allow all the work around and to show the high levels of cybersecurity, which for us is very important.
20 seconds, the last lines. There is a big problem. We said very important things. The red tape, the bureaucracy. Italy, for example, is stopped with 15 gigawatts that can be installed immediately in the renewable energy, which is just waiting for a signature. And I think also the speed for you is extremely important.
For us, it's fundamental, as for everybody. As for the whole infrastructure must be modernized. It's not enough to have a signature. In many times, you need 20 signatures, and this is the specific situation with the infrastructure today. But we don't lose our enthusiasm, we don't lose hope, which is also going to arrive in this sector. We hope it will be more simplified, as it has happened in other sectors, as Europe asks us to simplify.
Thank you very much, Elisabetta Ripa, CEO of Enel X-Way. Thank you very much and have a good morning. I would like to call Francesco Bettoni, the president of Brebemi Aleatica, better known as the A35, the corridor which takes from Brescia, passes through the Bergamo Plains, arrives in Milan. Good morning, President.
Good afternoon to you too, and to all those who are listening to us.
When we speak about electric cars, when we speak about sustainable mobility, we cannot also include yet, we must also include the road networks where these cars have to drive. The cities, but also the actual roads that take from one city to another, from one market to the other, from one pole to another. You are doing some very important things, very important and interesting things from this point of view. But I would like you to tell us.
First of all, thank you for this second year invitation. I was really pleasure to receive it, because as I said last year, we started to work deeply with a group of players of primarily mondial level. On the 3rd of December, we did the first experimenting regarding the system of the induction, of dynamic induction, dynamic wireless, power transfer, which gave excellent results. So we continued with our partners to strengthen and deepen this great revolutionary typology of electric charging through the cars that they travel. And on the 10th of June, in 15 days' time, we will present to the world our system, our complex system, which works perfectly.
Because it is real. I am also very curious to see physically how this will work, but there is already the experimentation which has been going on for a few months.
The experimentation regarding the efficiency and the functionality is already passed. We're already working for other experiments, which include the digitalization, which we want to insert regarding the communication between car and car, and car and highways, car and other means. I think, but I'm not only me that says it, that our system today, and I like to say it's not true that they say that Italy is always in the background, is always last in this theme, but I don't say it, but experts of the sector say it. This is the fourth revolution in the world, and it's one of the 100 innovations that Time magazine said recently could be. We are absolutely the first, so much so that some countries even asked us if they could know and see and be partners with us for what we have already been able to manage. So let's talk about the future. And if you allow me to say so, just two elements that I think is correct to reflect on. The first regards the recent report that the Ministry of Infrastructure, Mr. Giovannini, publicized, where he analyzed all the methods of alternative systems and traditional systems, and he made his classification, where he said expressly is that the future is electric. I'm telling you that this is a research of 200 pages, where inside the system of electricity, the dynamic induction is absolutely the most promising. And the second one is the market. It's not us who decides what will be done. It's already been decided. Just look at and read with attention the investments that BMW, Stellanti, our partners are doing, that all the great players of the market are making. Now that's the road. What are we doing? We are trying to remove the anxiousness, the recharging anxiousness, and we already found the system to monitor this, and it works perfectly. Not only that, and I take advantage of this today to say so, to say that this works already in 9 countries in the world. So we are not isolated. France, Germany, England, Finland, Norway, and the United States, and maybe also Israel, who are our partners. They've already started, and they've already done other partnerships. So this is the substance of the
development of this technology requests collaboration among many partners. The list is very long, 14 partners, but each one is referring to a different industry. Was that difficult?
It was difficult because regarding the automotive world, but why? Because we went with a huge group that was not Italian, because they were close to our future arena. We received a no from these people. We then changed and went to Stellantis, who in the meantime had done its own passages, and we were managed, and we were able, in my modest opinion, to have created the first company. So we found 13 partners. Each one was interested in resolving his own problem, his own company problem, in a unique contest called Einel Futur. And we all managed perfectly. And we are continuing. But I'll tell you, on the 10th of June, I will announce other important innovations.
So let's not reveal anything.
I'm not saying anything.
We'll
No.
be there. Thank you, Francesco Bettoni, President of A35 Brebemi Aleatica, for your contribution. And speaking about digital, I would like Fabio Fregi, from Italy Country Manager of Google Cloud. Thank you, Dr. Fregi, for coming here this morning. As we saw, the challenge of electricity, of making sustainable mobility, or as we were saying before, of smart mobility, passes through infrastructures, but digital also passes through digital, passes through data security, and also sustainability of data.
These are all important themes, actual themes, very, very important, because in June we will announce 2 regions, cloud Google, and one in Milan and one in Turin, where we will be able to put for the country, we can make available these processes where all will be able to use the digital. Often we speak about like comparison between petrol and the new petrol. It's like a new form of richness. But there's another reason.
The impact.
It's the impact. The environmental impact is very important. It's also true that the data center where they're all contained is very relevant. So to have green areas and green regions is very important because it guarantees that these data is processed in a more efficient way. It's important to do this. Google has always done it. They did it in 2004 and 2007. We became carbon neutral, so it's 15 years. 5 years, we reached zero impact, and we want to reach to carbon zero emission with 20 years of
But now let's try
future.
to explain this a bit better, because a company, a digital company, that in theory, at least that is what is said, it's not important where it is located, but because the service always arrives, needs the regions. There's a problem of security. There's a problem of edge cloud.
Yes, it's very important that the regions that distribute in all the world, we have about 40 in the world, that are near to the use of this, because it's important the colloquialism, who uses the PC, the telephone, and the region, the data center that actually emits. It's if there is some kind of lateness, it's important to have close by the use of these regions. To have 2 regions in Italy is for us very, very important. And this is what the contribution of Google has done to the development. Another one is the cybersecurity. It's very important because it's obvious that there is a problem, a very relevant problem, in the infrastructures in our country, in the public administration, but also many companies. And so to be able to guarantee the security of all their data and applications is a great priority. And it makes the country resilient. Let's not forget what happened recently in the pandemic, but also the conflicts. To be able to have infrastructures which are resilient, which give you a continuity of the service, is even in extreme matters, it's very important to be able to guarantee the service, because it's not a remote event as we've seen the past 2 years.
The electric cars definitely will always become connected cars. There are experimentations which are very interesting. Dr. Bettoni will speak about it later in the Corriere della Sera. There are many important things about the driving at a very high level, at a level 4, which is very interesting also for the moving of transport of goods. For Benetton, there's a little truck that drives on the road and everybody follows it. You, at one point, are the most stressed part. My question is, when this will become a critical mass, also when 5G will start from a specialty to a commodity, will you be always under pressure?
Yes. In fact, we're getting ready for this. And a direct experience. Remember that inside Alphabet, which is the holding, which has Google, there's also Waymo, which is a leading company in autonomous, which has kilometers and the routes. Therefore, from this experience, we are relieving that the volume is incredible. Also with our Italian partners, we are trying to help them with this, because when you have this kind of situation, you get the information, you get the data, it has to be downloaded immediately, massive volumes, and also the time must be short, and then it must be analyzed and then set forth. And so it's absolutely important that the cloud is the response with the other 2 big situations, which is the machine learning. It doesn't mean mature, but it's gone ahead, which offers many perspectives, immense It's a reality, and quantum, which is offers a great capacity. It's great capacity and much more
Also
superior.
from the kind of security. Also because it generates a lot of data, but also generates white noise, especially if there's not a machine that can transfer the data into information. Thank you very much, Fabio Fregi, Country Manager of Google Cloud, for being with us today. Thank you very much. Good morning. Fabio Pressi, CEO of A2A e-mobility. As you see, this is a marathon of contents, and taking notes is not easy because you're giving a lot of important information about the future mobility, and you're doing it with a very big ability. A2A started a company, A2A Mobility. The objective is to speed up the transition.
First of all, I would like to say I'm very happy to speak about mobility in the Brescian world, because it's 10 years that the Brescians have been able to see this change. And not even a year ago, the company was formed because they believed firmly in this situation. And we decided to invest more than 24,000 charging stations. And we started a few years ago, and we want to give a great impulse to this innovation, which is a technological innovation. And if you want, we can talk about it a little bit more.
Let's go directly into this technological point. I remember a speech by your CEO, by Mazzoncini, who was trying to explain what is your idea of recharging. It's a charging which goes against, maybe it's a bit strong, but clashes with the finery, let's say, of a city, which is things that can be moved around. We cannot imagine filling up the cities with little charging points, such as Brescia, which is not Mumbai, but it has problems with
that effectively also Italy, different to the north, doesn't have garage and situations like in other countries. So we have to find an alternative for the residents who have to charge in their houses, because it's very difficult to understand, but it's also difficult to see. But you have to speak of speed, of power. It's not exactly the same thing as like charging with carbon or petrol. The recharging must be slow, diffused. It must give a kind of alternative to who doesn't have a garage. And it has to be big and quick to join the countries and the towns. There are these two visions. Today, we see on our streets a very 22 kilowatt infrastructure, which is average. It's like it shows how the first cars were born. Our technology on the street of 10 years is the same as the cars that you've seen on the roads, no? They're talking about these instructions, which speaks to the vehicles. It puts together the heart and the battery and the electric car. Of course, there will be also further evolutions, but today, in the change, and to put these two worlds together, we must look at the evolution of the cars and how the cars can charge the batteries. In fact, the automotive car are pushing the slow charge, and then there's also a fast recharge. So our infrastructure must follow this evolution. To answer,
you are a player. You're a player, a very important player. You are not the only one on the territory. There are many others. Probably the market will create more players. There is a great theme, and that is the interoperability, meaning how the telephone, the little mobile phones, has become a commodity. And I don't know exactly which network I'm working on, I'm surfing on. Obviously, you're also working in this way.
Yes, of course, I must say, fortunately, the world of the recharging is also interoperable, because it's distinct between who does infrastructure and who does the payment. Let's say the app to pay is like the app that we can see in the mobility, and there shall be an interaction. But today in our infrastructure, they're interoperable. And of course, it's only 1 year that we are working on it, but we are with the principal player, and now we're contacting all the other players. Because in this world, it must be like this. It has to enable people who come from abroad to be able to charge their cars. More we have, more this business will become important.
There is a theme which is also about transparency of the source from which energy comes. From this point of view, A2A is spending a lot. I saw in my for my newspaper the last industrial plan. There is show that there's a very strong plan to show how a company of this kind can aim at renewables. As today, if you could photograph the whole thing, if I were to take my car to a little charging, where can I get the energy
Yes,
from?
it's all produced from renewable. Doesn't mean from the renewable one, but there is a mechanism called certified origin that it'll guarantee that all that is given to the car is coming from a renewable, sustainable situation. So it's 100%.
Perfect. I'm sure that it's not polluting. Thank you, Fabio
Thank you very
Pregi
much.
from Maurizio Tira, the Dean of University of Brescia. Thank you for being present this morning. Very important and very interesting. What are the main challenges for the research on sustainable mobility? Because here we're speaking about companies, but at this point you're speaking about the future.
Yes, I think that the research, university research must work in two sides. On one is this great specialization. For example, we can speak about the nodes, the technological nodes, which is necessary to affront certain themes. But we must also, and we have we must look at how ample it is and anticipate future hypotheses that don't go directly on the problem. For example, mobility, sustainable mobility cannot reduce the problem on the car because for many years the literature has been seen as a service and not only as a together of objects. And this will happen more so in the future. And also if we think about private cars, there is a strong link between the way one goes from A to B and to move people or goods and the sector that the territory has. So the negative part is what hits the sustainable mobility, but not only combustion that makes the vehicles move, not only private, but it's also other safety, accidents, congestion, the dust particles that are formed, which are very negative and which are not overcome by making electric cars. I don't think any of us want to have to stop in a queue to stop in a queue and not to be angry anymore because all the cars are electric. But also or to have difficulty to have access because there are no infrastructures. We have to see sustainability in a more ample situation. It goes from research of all kinds of transport, but also of the causes that make us move one to another.
As you were speaking, I was thinking of an example, but you tell me if this is an example which is good. Maybe it makes more sense to use 1,500 kilos of car. This was the proportion that we can then speak about hydrogen, diesel, electricity, in order to go shopping every day. Or wouldn't it be easier to use an instrument like an integrated logistic within the city that brings the shopping and the post like e-commerce in a way which has less impact but is more regulated?
Yes, of course.
It's an urban
Yes,
theme.
of course. But there's not much sense to think that you'll arrive at a charging station which will give us 800 kilometers with a car when objectively, at least if it's not for pleasure or because you're doing Miglia, you should use other transport means because through Milano, Rome, the train is much more competitive or the plane. So there shouldn't be this idea, how can I go with a private car to have 800 kilometers in a local mobility situation. This is a wrong decision to take from the start. You know, not even thinking about how the car should go. This should be seen as well. There are many distances that are done by car, which shouldn't be done by car. There is this kind of equation that should be taken into consideration, where there is situations which you can't use other transport systems. Then that's when you should then consider, you'd have to have there, the private car should be used. In the situations where there aren't other possibilities, this should be seen. Yesterday, Giovannini showed the deaf, and it's holistic. It brings insight from the transport means, of all kinds of transport means, to the urban means, which is the way we want to go.
Now, you have the great lack of being able to intercept, because of your work, the new generations. The theme of owning a car, the theme of as a car service, it's true that the kids, the young, the 20-year-olds, the 25-year-olds, don't consider any more mobility, private mobility as an asset.
I think that everything is changing. The mentality is changing. The young consider and desire services that are less linked to the possession, to the individual possession of transport. For example, let me try and say, as a father, he likes to have a car with a full tank, but he doesn't care so much that it's their car, as long as it's a car that works and has a full tank. This is what is bringing us to a young and a youth that is more ready for these kind of sharing mobilities. And this is a very interesting perspective, maybe more interesting than other researchers. However, this research is a system, a service, and this means that technology and social it shows the behavior of a person.
Of course, thank you, Maurizio Tira, the Dean of the University of Brescia, for having been with us this morning. Paolo Dinolfi, the CEO of DCFA. Thank you for being here with us today. SIFA, beautiful name. You rent cars for big companies.
Yes, principally yes. Good afternoon, everybody, and also who's listening to us. And as you say in the theme, we want to have a mobility which is more innovative as possible, more oriented to the companies as possible. We are a company, a biped banca, and therefore with a national capillary, we entered in these years in every type of mobility possible. We accompanied the development of the e-commerce in bringing home the packets to the house. Well, that's electric, which is sharing. We're multi-kernel.
But is it true that what they say, that during the pandemic, and then obviously due to the pandemic, the changes of the people's habits, your sector went into a crisis?
I would say not. I would say not. In fact, referring to this, what I've just spoken about, there was an explosion of the use. We had to find vehicles to give, to be able to take on and to take. There was a less use of private or company use renting. So the kilometers were reduced, but the sector didn't go into crisis. In fact, it was accelerated by what I said before, including the changes, the cultural changes, the car sharing that started before and stopped during the pandemic. Now it's picking up again very fast. And there is a big demand of products of car sharing.
The companies in this period, in this moment, now for about a year for now, have understood that making a transparent announcement about footprinting, about the shareholders, but it also helps their capacity to speak with people who work within this kind of company. And of course, they spend 8 or 10 hours in a company or maybe in an office. Have you noticed among your clients that there is a higher sensitivity to more than the past to choose a less polluting car than before when you're doing your agreements?
But by now the companies have entered into this sustainability concept, and their fleet managers have born, or the mobility managers have now been formed, where they have to see how they can use the machines for their employees. Who has not understand this is the politics. And we can see this in the incentives which have just been diffused, for example, communication, even if the portals aren't using.
Today, theoretically,
maybe today. But if we look at the essence, it's reserved principally to the private sector. Because we are speaking about companies, and the companies who do many kilometers, our cars do about averagely 40,000 kilometers a year, maybe 4 times the normal times, or even 8 times, because some citizens do 5,000 kilometers now. So the incentives will go to Maria, who doesn't have the money to buy a new car because she doesn't have the money. The companies who would love to substitute their cars and who'd like to put in electric cars and put in plug-in cars, they're almost taken to the other side. They can't do the change because they are forgotten in a plan in this direction. It's quite a humiliation, because every day in the company, from the people who rent cars and all the companies that have to rent cars and the influencers of the cars, in the corporate world, they would like to insist in conversion to the ecological world, but they don't find political support who gives them incentives. It gives it to the people who cannot afford to change their cars. They can't change their cars because the cars have gone old. In the pandemic, we have cars who have done 200,000 kilometers. They must be changed, but we can't change them with this typology of cars.
The very last question for those who could interest the industrialists who will then arrive in the second panel. The shortage of raw materials and the components and the chips is creating a very big slowdown in your orders?
No, it's creating panic because the cars are taking very long to arrive. Orders that are being done now, it will have 6, 7, 8 months, even a year and a half to get their cars that they've ordered. So we are trying to anticipate this order. But there's a very long wave. Who doesn't order now will have another year and a half, 2 years to wait. So it's a very difficult situation, but contemporarily, there's a very big difficulty who produces cars. They don't actually help our structures to give these supplies to those who make so many kilometers. They try to push the cars to other alternative channels, and they put great difficulty into the long lease and the short lease terms. We don't have the cars for tourists who come from abroad to visit our town. There are no cars to take them around.
This is terrible. Paolo Ginolfi, the CEO of SIFA, thank you very much for being with us. And now we will continue. And now I say we are on time. And we will continue with the second panel. The second panel, which is this morning, which now will enter the industrial world, because I would like to understand how the changes, the technological changes that will affect the mobility, how will they impact the industries. We shall ask Anna Tripoli, who is the president of the young businessmen of Brescia.
Good afternoon, everybody.
As we were saying, also, as your president said before, Mr. Beretta, definitely the automotive sector and the Brescia automotive sector has in front of it great challenges which will mark the drivers for the next years?
Absolutely, yes. In fact, I would like to thank you all for this involvement in this as representative of young interpreters of Brescia. This is the third Green Talk I'm participating in. And I'd like to show you what will be, introduce to you what will be our next table, our mobility on the industrial world. I'm very happy to be here for a double reason. First of all, because of President of the Young Interpreters of Brescia, and who closely believe in this, because we are speaking about which way, which technology to use in the future, and which direction, which industrial direction to take, which the companies must take for at least for the next 20 years. It will take, of course, it will influence the young. I'd like also to be a little bit vain and to tell you as a woman in businesswoman, I represent a sector which is less invited because it's a sector which is not usually involving us. And in the mobility, as you're speaking about in the past. When we use the word mobility, I like to think that you're not talking about a precise technology, that the impact wasn't really considered. Speaking about the triple value that it has, economic, social, and environmental. In the same time, I'd like to think that this transition is not only exclusively but principally linked to the ESG parameters, but that it's really done into research for the competitive of our companies. And competitiveness, I mean to respond to all the needs of the territory where these companies are. And also in efficiency, industrial efficiency. I know that this Brescian compart is very, very sensitive to this, and are by direct experience. In March this year, we involved 24 companies in a research with the Confindustria in Brescia and Banca Intesa San Paolo. And very important and very performing data came out, 71% of the companies involved. And I'm speaking of companies that make like 2.7 billion. These companies are or have an internal part in their company for research and development, and the expense is 4.3%. So it's very important, this data.
So now we have to actually remove this idea that journalists often we say, which is that companies in this transition are confused.
No, absolutely not. The confusion, which is unseen, because internally there's no confusion, is to find efficiency and to find the right and competitive road. I'd like to also say that I said the Green Talk last year, also always these 24 companies we are putting down with very important partners, Miglia, Banca Intesa, a national bank, the University of Brescia, is in the team of our researchers. We want to construct an algorithm which measures and allows an unequivocal way to measure the performance of sustainability. It must be the same as every other index in the balance. And that's what I said before. And to remove this confusion, it must be communicated to the territory with an easy way. It must be communicated, and want or not, you have to show the merit to the small companies as well, because they will travel on these ratings and these indexes. It's very important for companies to show the investment that they make. And the third is that it must be absolutely competitive, because to be out of the market is not sustainable.
Now, this is very, very interesting what you're saying. But also Maurizio Tira said from the University of Brescia to think of mobility with an ample view, not only from an also for research and development for electric cars, but also to imagine other models to move goods and people.
Of course, this is the first great teaching that pandemic has given us. We have to reconfigure the whole chain, not only the production, but also the distribution, the services, to research the efficiency from what is requested from us, but also to create a value. Today, there is a coming close to the companies and the community or reference communities. Everything has changed. Also, the relationship with collaborators have changed. Everything has changed. And the mobility must respond to this, to get closer to the services, to the industrial areas, more than to think maybe about models of transfer, how to move people and goods in a more efficient way.
Well, thank you very much. Anna Tripoli is the president of the Young Entrepreneurs of the Confindustria of Brescia. Thank you for being with us. Now we're going into the important part of the second block, which is how we're going to spend the morning speaking about sustainable mobility. And we're speaking about industrial transition because electric transition is industrial. Silvia Bodardo, who's the professor of Politecnico of Turin. Good morning, Professor.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Of technology, we have already spoken, but technology maybe, if we speak about electric cars, is the question of batteries. The game changer to transform electric cars into a mass kind of car, if this is our objective, is to transform the battery into something that does not create the anxiety that we spoke about before.
Certainly, the reserve of energy in an electric car, but in other systems that we use every day, that have made it possible to change the energy is produced, where it's done is the battery. Of course, everyone asks that the battery have more performance, that it allows us to do more kilometers, that it charges quicker, that it is actually more safe, and of course, and much more sustainable. It's very difficult, of course. If it's a lot of road has come a long way from the lead batteries for the first cars which were electric, and they had the lead batteries to the ones of today. Huge leaps have been done. Of course, I thank also to you to have been invited to this panel as a researcher in Europe. We are working very much to understand how to sustain the future in the world of batteries, because batteries born in Europe are designed from the moment of to be recycled. This is a great theme to consider in all our thoughts, because yes, the battery must be performant, but it must not create a future or for our future generations an ulterior resource to pollute and have to be dismantled.
Now here in Italy, we have been suffering for this industrialization like leopard stains. We have these automotive, we have a lot of avant-garde, cutting-edge technology. We've lost a lot of chemistry. And having lost the chemistry, we've lost the know-how. For example, one of the last companies that has survived, that created batteries, has been sold to the Japanese. Europe, in this point, as a productive capacity and know-how in the production of batteries, and then you explained what type of production. We will then repeat how is it?
Europe has decided to affront with determination this theme, because today 95% of the batteries are produced in Asia. So it's in this European panorama from starting research to the finalization, so as we can bring the production to Europe. So the European Battery Alliance was introduced to install 38 gigafactories in Europe, but we mustn't forget that we must rush around the innovation because Asian countries have done a lot of research as well, so we must look at that. There is Battery 2030. We are thinking of how the future and of the design for the recycle, but also how to put in sensors into the batteries in the cells and how they repair themselves, auto-repair. There's a whole lot of innovation, one of which, of course, is the formation, the training. This is a big theme that we should do. There's 38 gigafactories in Europe, 2 or 3 in Italy. We will need to train 800,000 people to be able to go and work in these sectors. So when I hear many times that people lose their work, I think it's a bit strange because we'll be creating many, many, many more. And we have this big job to work in this future. On the 1st of June, there is an event which will connect 4 Europeans, one in Turin, Brussels, and Warsaw. And many European students will be speaking about the question of batteries in Europe. So we'll see what will happen. There'll be many young scientists will be writing themes on what they'll be able to see with these nice, young, fresh minds, what they'll be able to bring out.
You were saying it before, and we've passed from lead to lithium. Is it possible to imagine new material, less impacting material, and above all,
yes, of course, lithium doesn't have a great impact because it doesn't have a great impact. It entered recently this year, became a critical material, but it's still very, very available. Major production in Australia and also in South America. There's a lot in Europe as well. They're starting new in Serbia and Portugal and Finland. There are countries that are opening up new production. However, this goes back to the recycle. Once, a very important point is that it must be recycled. So the exhausted batteries must be, I'm always speaking about the lead ones. We have batteries that have lead from 100 years ago. Nobody's going to go into a mine now to get lead to do that. But the lead that is used in the batteries are, however,
the lead of
recycled.
the cannon that was done in the Independence War.
Yes, there are things that we already used. Of course, other elements are in studying phases. Sodium, for example, for the application of the stationary batteries, not for the automotive, because lithium has this great advantage of being small and have a high tension. It gives you a great density, and which is not the same in others.
But for a storage, I had read that there's a project in African countries, there's a salt battery.
Yes,
battery made of salt.
for the application, the stationary application. If I must recuperate stock and get energy from a renewable source, I don't have much limit, like in a vehicle, which could create mass. So I need a small, light battery and also potent, because I need to accelerate, I have to infrate, I have to brake. When I'm in a stationary situation, I don't have these problems. In a recuperation of energy, those other situations are possible. For a second use of the batteries for the automotive, we can consider them exhausted and not usable when maybe they are already 80% still to use. So the use of other opportunities or cases is to be considered. If we see, and as we can see, there is a recycle and less expensive and more complete, it's better to have batteries new with reused material than with batteries with cells.
The other critical point is not only the duration, but also the weight. What can we do for this?
The two things are actually correlated. The duration is on how we use it. Fast charge is nice, but it stresses the battery. And so it's good to think, as we said before, to have fast charge only when it's necessary, like for in the highway, for example, but habitually to charge it slowly, because it helps the battery. But the lightning comes on this new lithium, is the third on the periodic table, as you said about chemical before, the lightest, and also the other elements that are used in the battery, that are used in the cell, don't have a great mass. Sodium is much more heavy, and so on. Of course, the difference is not only the reduction of the cell. We could arrive at a density, a high density, with new technology, with the status holder, which reduces the volume and raises the density, or as we see in a while, completely use sulfur to substitute all materials. Sulfur could guarantee density 5 times as much as what we have now. There is a lot of road still to go. We're happy to travel this road. Let's open up. Let's go to this future and see what the young kids can do for us.
Yes, of course.
On the 1st of June.
It's important. Silvia
Thank you very much.
Bodardo, the professor of the Polytechnic of Turin. Thank you very much. And now let us continue with the industries. Marco Bonometti, the president of OMR. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Because, first of all, good afternoon, everybody. Also because it's important to participate in this meeting. I'm doing this often, every day, throughout Italy, because we have to tell the truth to the people. Because for now, we've been speaking so many lies. So it's very important that we find ourselves here, that the industries, the Italian industries, is suffering. Please be careful, because this is a very delicate moment. We must decide if in Europe we want to continue alive, the manufacturing world, or if we don't care about it. So we are asking the other continents, the other countries, what to do.
There is a problem with norms, with regulations. Europe gives indications. A big part of the industrialists don't agree with indications that Europe is giving.
And first of all, the industrialists have always been supporters of decarbonization. They always wanted to look after the environment. Europe has Green Deal, which we are paying today very much. But Green Deal has shown the failure of the transition of the... We cannot do it. If we can't transition energy, we cannot manage. Europe has showed 8% of emission of carbon dioxide, the 7% and 8%, and all these percentages, and for 1%, we understand that maybe we have taken some strange decisions and unilateral decisions, letting 2 continents go ahead, Asia and Europe, America.
What should the role be of the industry?
The industrial Europeans must have an energetic politics. What has happened? They booked Fit 55. They put rules. They've based when they could put, but they said in 2030 we'll have all the innovate. We don't have enough today to run our countries. So they said we would have so much more, but today we have nothing. In Europe, we should have double what we have at the moment. And Italy is again at the tail because it's worse. Today the problem fundamentally is the energy problem, the clean energy. We would have had all the sustainable in September. Since September we have been asking to have the problem of the cost of gas and energy. And you know that all our gas comes from gas.
Having done 100, the recent data show that the electricity is produced by gas. 30% by renewable sources, and 20% from nuclear that we import from France. Can you explain to us how much the bill for a company, electric bill for a company, has changed?
In fact, after 24th of February, the world changed. The war in Ukraine accelerated what was already very critical. The cost of gas, cost of raw materials, cost of energy. For example, today, companies who last year paid 100,000 a month of gas, today pay 600, 700,000. There has been an increment of 600%. Do you understand that this is not possible to rechange and to turn over the problems? There are companies that prefer to close than to go into loss. But what really angers us is that there's no way out. We should have had travelation in Adriatic Croatian. They've already raised it. We should have reactivated the ENG, which have stopped being used. They're still stopped. Bring the liquid gas. We don't know how to use it. One thing which is very positive, though, in front of the position of Europe, is that for 2035, reduction of 100% has now been reduced to 90%. It means that our concept is falling positively. We want to have the same dignity for all tribes. The biogas, the fuel that comes from the non-fossils, the methane, the hydrogen. We cannot fix and stay fixed on something that will be happening in 2035. Our president and showed how the technology is in continuous evolution. Not even the university can do it. The electric cars cost 50% more. You want to change with car for something that costs 50% more. It's not possible. The incentives that we're given these days, we tried at least to put into the hydrothermic cars, because the Euro 6 cars that they're speaking about, but they're much less polluting.
Very interesting. You who know very well the sector because you've been working it for years. How much technology is there still to be developed in an endothermic engine?
It's enough that you say Euro 4 cannot, Euro 4 down can't go. Incentives to all new cars, the 3 years that have been offered, wasn't a question on the electric cars to give to foreigners. We managed to change the proportion. If they put 400 million to the electric, we could incentivize 40 cars. If we put 2,000 cars on the endothermic cars, we could incentivize 200 cars. And if we could to bring down the park, circulating park, and to bring down the carbon dioxide, we'd already have half of the objective we booked. The other subject is the battery. I understand the searches. When we said that you had to have a European battery, it was the idea. Today, having them, as they're done, the lithium and the nickel from Asia, we may have got rid of Russian gas, but now we're in the hands of the Asians. They'll decide when to give, how much to charge. It's really taking for a ride. It's the last part. They have to put everything together, but the whole know-how will remain in Asia. So I'm sure that in Europe, it's true that we use the electric cars in the center, in the inhabited areas, and there'll be a raising that in Europe they want to arrive at 12 million cars produced. A few years ago they said 17,000. In China they've already arrived at 30 million. America is already 17 million, and in 2040 there will be 1 billion cars with normal endothermic cars. It means they'll produce them in other continents. So, in order to consolidate the electric with the endothermic, can be done if the normal cars are done with a lowest emission. The cars, in fact, the companies are starting to reproduce again endothermic motors because it's much easier and it's much better for the companies. We must also understand how do we calculate the emission of CO2. It must be done from the start of the body until the end. It mustn't be just linked to the tube. The constructors have made this choice because they were told that in 2030 there would be renewable, sustainable electricity. Today, the manufacturers are re-looking at their situation, re-deciding what to do with the investigations, and they realized, and there's a kind of union, and they should rethink again the Green Deal, think of the Green Deal, and to make it stop and try and consolidate both. In Italy, 70% of the people don't have the garage. Where do they charge the phone?
In fact, we spoke about that. Thank you very much, President of OMR, Marco Bonomi, for speaking to us today and for your verve. Sergio Metelli, Managing Director of Metelli Group, who is coming with Roberto Cipollone, who is a professor of L'Aquila University. Why this double chat has a reason. Because Metelli, which is the leader of a project which is not at the end. First, let's start about this project, and then I'd like to ask you a few questions because you're very, very involved in the electric part. I was interested in your vision. This project is called Hyper, and the positivity of this project that just started. To qualify this project, I invited Professor Cipollone to be here with us to give some quality to this project. Professor Cipollone is a professor at university in Aquila University for energy and environment, and is on our board for research and development. And this shows how we are really committed to this importance. You open the industries to research.
So I'd let him speak a few notes.
Professor, can you explain to us Hyper? What is Hyper?
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I thank Miglia, Simbola, and Metelli, the company Metelli, for inviting me. Bonometti, who spoke before, spoke exactly about the problem. So what is Hyper doing? Hyper, I would just like to explain what Hyper is, and then I will explain about the reasoning before. Hyper interprets in the only way the energy transition, the only possible way. It gives support to the thermal propulsion of the engines. So it is an important point in these engines and for the engines that characterize the air and reduce the CO2. And this is the most important thing. This is what we have to speak about before. This is what we have to speak about more than anything else when we speak about mobility of the future. What does this project mean? Metelli has made in 3 years in the sector, which is in the important sector, in the thermal management sector of the engine and of the vehicle, making auxiliary components which are electrified, which can be functional for hybrid, which is which is for the electrical propulsion, which is maybe a mirage for the big electrification of the auxiliaries gives a lot of benefits.
You have removed
We have removed the main auxiliary of the we have controlled the thermal engine, the thermal parts of the engine. We remove it interprets the explored the possibility of providing current thermal hybrid powertrains with cooling fluid circulation pump solutions, also of different technology than the current one, which is dragged by electric motors. It has no logic.
Where does this idea come from?
The idea comes from having to control the flow of the cooling flow of the engine. We can avoid cooling it down when it is cold. We start the engine with the cooling fluid. So when the engine is cold, we don't need it. So we avoid heating up the engine, and then instead of then having to cool it down. So we have started the warm-up, but there are these benefits.
Can we say that it's a car more intelligent? It knows exactly how much to consume.
Yes, yes.
Excuse me if I'm saying something, but it requalifies and gives back dignity to the thermic machine. It gives a great contribution to the reduction of CO2 and to toxic gas. It gives preciousness to an engine, which we thought had gone, but now it gives it back and is efficiently given back in these systems which collaborate together. So it's an evolution.
We recuperate a deep, important technology of the engines, which is national and European as well, and we promote this engine to have environmental impact. And that's exactly what the gentleman was saying before. When we speak about transition to electricity, we must have our feet on the ground. We cannot think about using a car that does not emit anything. Just 3 numbers so that we can explain what we're speaking about. Electric. This is very illogical. If we consume 100 million barrels of petrol a day, we consume 10 million tons of carbon a day. If we put all this necessity, or this energy necessity, which is the base of the energy, if we put it all of these kind of barrels, in 1.5 days, we would have had enough barrels to reach the moon. We would have enough barrels to arrive the sun. So when we speak to transiting to electricity, we have to have our feet on the ground. I always want to move the limit always further.
Evocative innovation.
Things. I would like to create revolutionary scenarios. But when we speak about energy, we are speaking about something that is incredibly inert. All the efforts that have been done to reduce the energy emissions, if we look at what has been invested in order to what has been obtained, this is depressing. I don't want to now depress everybody. But in Italy, we have reduced the CO2 since 1990 by 19% since 1990. Now, 55 says that we have to reduce it to 100%. In 2030, it has to be from 0 to 100%. In engineering, we have decreasing marginality, which is every next improvement has a less. How can we reach these efforts? We have to be.
Mr. Bettelli, I think I've understood that we've arrived at a maturity technologically, but also in a form of perceiving the mobility, the electrical, as a businessman?
Well, it will have its use in some places, in some circumstances. We must not demonize, but we must also make it as our only battle horse. We will be many times, we'll have many times of energy, types of types. What the industrialists ask is that we all be neutral, that be energy neutrality, and that there be less emissions of bad substances, and that research and development can have put a lot of important things in our hands. And the politics was that is taking this decision.
Professor, the time to market, the IPER, have you seen it?
The time to market is decidedly aligned. Hyper has been produced, has produced a lot of products with a lot of that are being homologized, and the real driving, which will become even stronger and even more for the environment of the machine.
We have the data to understand.
Metelli is ready. We have already decided in the board of directors for this project. And we'll put these.
So it will be an aftermarket, or it will be. We'll start with an aftermarket because it's difficult to give this to the companies if you don't have a kind of background from a long time before. In a second moment, when we have particular solutions which are particularly intelligent, then we'll propose them to the manufacturers. But the circulating park is about 11 years, and so the aftermarket, there are many. So we have the ambition to do it well and to be adequate, for the cars that drive.
Okay, thank you very much to both of you. Thank you very much for coming, Dr. Metelli and Professor from L'Aquila. We will continue. We will continue speaking about research with Sergio Savaresi from the Polytechnic of Milan. Thank you for being with us, Professor.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Polytechnic of Milan is a fire with this transition to electricity, especially about sustainable mobility. We spoke before with your dean, Otto Resta, who in an interview 4 or 5 years ago already imagined using your research scenarios, which were very interesting, not only concerning the emissions, but for the engines, but in kind of complete environment of mobility, because there isn't only a big challenge to pollute less, but also to be, there's also electricity, also digitity, there's mobility, autonomous mobility. Could you explain to us the impact of the technology that smart vehicles of CO2 are having on the environment?
Yes. First of all, it seems like the relationship is strange, not very clear. The truth is that, first, it's been said many times, the real revolution, the real situation that will impact will be the kind of change that will be from going from one kind of sustainability, 40 million of properties, to another one, which will be public, for example, car sharing. This is the real revolution, and it's a model revolution, not a technological one. Car sharing, in Milan, we've done it. We're one of the most advanced towns.
Even if the account, if I can say, of the companies.
Exactly. It's a problem of car sharing. It's an economic sustainability. It needs a lot of capabilities. We need many cars. They're always in the wrong place. They've access times which are unforeseeable. So in this way, the cars, it doesn't work very well. It's been experimented, but it doesn't work, especially when you go in less populated areas. What will be the big bang of this mobility will be the autonomous car, that in the end, it's like a robotaxi, will allow to be able to overtake this problem completely. We'll have less number of cars. Our we say with a tenth of the cars that are around in the car now, we can have the same kind of mobility. But it'll be cars, it'll do many kilometers, and they'll be like little robot taxis. This is the revolution.
Marco Bononetti is not very happy with what you are saying.
It's true that it brings about a revolution in the numbers. It brings a redefinition of the car assets. But I can only say that these things must have been foreseen in the future. And we, as industry and country, we must adapt. This will happen. Forgive me to say this. Bill Gates used to say, the people over-evaluate the changes, the short changes, but undervaluate the long changes of 10, 15 years. Be careful, at the beginning of 1900s, 100 horses a car. 15 years later, 100 cars, one horse. So let's put our head up and look forward, because it's a change in the model that will be the revolution. And the change in the model will bring back all the technology. Just another aspect which is quite interesting. There's another phenomenon which is happening at the moment, which is very important, which is the virtualization. The pandemic brought it about. People move less. The images move, words move, but people move less. Moved together with the other phenomena, the nomadism, digital nomadism. A lot more work can be done digitally from the beach. So we expect a strange, unforeseen, until a little time ago, change tendency of urbanization. It will go from 15 years. It has changed. It will bring about this change in tendency. And the people will move less. They'll be in less populated areas. And there'll be a problem of logistics.
I think about now, this makes me think about an article by Aldo Bonomi, who is not our president of ACI, who says the pandemic teaches us that maybe it's better to forget the smart cities and think of smart lands.
Exactly. This term is used curiously. This nomadism, digital nomadism, it gives less people to live differently from where they work. It's a revolution. It brings about a reduction of mobility, or the traditional mobility to go to work or to buy something, but the logistic will really increase. There will be sustainability, will be linked to have a logistic which has to be highly, highly automized.
Don't tell me. I did 6 years of my life commuting from Brescia to Milan to switch on a computer. I think many people have had this problem. Also you. This is very interesting. We're not speaking only about mobility, private mobility. We're speaking also about logistics. A model of logistics which is different, that could remove a lot of traffic from our cities.
Yes, of course, this is true. Changes which are model changes, which could move radically the concept of mobility and the technology that is behind it. At this proposal, I'd like to just say the relationship between autonomous and electric cars. We've spoken about this a lot, about the electric cars. The electric car, in reality, in this moment, has a problem to take on, and this is true what people have been saying, because the mobility, it shows it's difficult to private property. It's like a father of the family. A father can have a car. He's forced to get a car. Has a car 600 kilometers big, with a big boot, with a dog, 5 people, and so on. And 90% of the time, or 99.9% of the time, he goes in town alone. So this is greatly inefficient. The divided with much less sharing will really make you choose what you need in the time, and it's a natural change without being forcing to change to the electric, because there won't be anymore the problem of the range. Like, for example, an extreme case, I'm speaking like in a paradox. If I have to do 1,000 kilometers, I'll change the car, like I change the horse. So in reality, it's all these problems of the electric cars today are linked, is because we link it to the personal property of cars. If we unblock this, it will all become much easier.
It will also change the role of the big producers.
Absolutely, yes. Yes, there's a revolution taking place in the moment, and you know that some people win, some people lose. Usually, who wins is that who can look at the future. Great novelty of cars. Let me just cite some passwords. All suppliers will make this leap ahead, tier 0.5. I'm not a constructor, but they'll do that. And so that all suppliers will have to make this leap ahead in the digital world.
And then the platforms which will then make the cars available to the population.
Of course, the big fear of the big companies is the arrival of the digital colossals. If you think that the autonomous car is long-head technology, which is much more complex, and it's 90% digital. So they are the ones who are entering in this world and are completely changing the whole sector of the car world. There will be a big revolution. If you like it good or not, we have to have the visibility to understand this.
A last question. There is a question, a legislative question. The only car, autonomous car, that I could get into was in Finland, because in Finland there is a law which allows their experimentation. Will we overcome, I don't know even how to call this obstacle for innovation?
Yes, of course, because you never stop the tide. You don't stop the tide. The revolution is so impacting on everything that at a certain point the legislation will have to adapt. There will be countries where this pallet will be brought down rapidly, and others will follow. But you can't stop it. You can't stop this tide.
Sergio Savaresi from the Polytechnic of Milan, thank you very much. Thank you for giving us your vision of the future. Paolo Steparava, the CEO of the group, Steparava Group, which is located in Adro. Good afternoon. Hello, Paolo. Not very good news came from the professor of Politecnico.
So, as all changes, we need time. The curve of the learning curve is digital. There is a movement that must be followed with great attention. I'm sure there are many opportunities on the table at the moment. Problem is that at the moment, there are so many that no one actually understands which one to put together. When there was an explosion in a good way of the motors, of the endothermic from diesel 100 years ago, the opportunities were represented by a car with an engine that was to be lighter, evolving. It was to be lighter. There was different type of technology, but it was a line. But now we have many lines. And this situation is a problem which has been created by a European legislation which has an enormous positive responsibility to reduce pollution, but a big presumption to do it that the rest of the world has to also do their own thing. Why do I say this? Because in the rest of the world, we have countries who say that they can do great investment in mobility, electric mobility, but then who has done it in India, which isn't really a small country, 1.4 billion people, but there's no electricity in their factories. How can they charge their cars? They don't have the same kind of idea of distribution of electricity. It's not even thinkable to understand what we could do in Italy. Imagine in India. How much does India pollute? A great amount. We are trying to do this like big way to reduce pollution, but it must be objective and effective, because air moves. Air doesn't stay still in the towns. are the small, the subtle, the CO2 stops around, but in the various towns of Aldo, and so on, the air turns and turns around and goes around also the pollution. So many countries must come together and take to their maturity. They must bring their maturity to where they're going. So, as they said, some were a little bit agitated. The problem is that it's not a personal principle. It's not a question of personal principle. It's not endothermic engines that are dead. But if the problem wasn't posed yesterday, we've known this problem about pollution. It's not 2-3 years ago that we knew it, but it's 15-20 years that we're speaking about it. Why were incentives given to a technology that today is not mature enough to give to results?
It's not mature, it's not sustainable.
You've said it, so I'll go in there. First, we used to say electricity was produced by renewable fonts. Perfect. Right or not, that's the one the person will sell. Because we have 20% of renewable energy. 30%, perfect. If 30% for 55 is giving us the first categorical results, the only time we've ever heard that someone has actually said, what is the technology we must use to resolve the problem. They tell you, you must use an electric car to save the problem. It's too expensive. It's still polluting because it's still 30% the renewable font. We're speaking about the park today, but if we have to double, because there will be a transition which will raise the amount of electric cars, we'll have less electricity available, because what we've done in the last 20 years will not give us 20% or double the amount in 5 or 6 years. I have some doubts. Nuclear, we can't even speak about that in this country. It's a taboo, but you should speak about it. There are some technologies that in 20 years' time will be more sustainable. So, our company, I'm not worried for my company. I'm worried for a system, an automotive system on a supply chain that suffers a lot. And I'm asking myself why. Maria, who puts away the man, she puts away the money. Grandma Maria, to buy for her grandchildren. She did it because in that time her grandchildren will live in a less polluted area. I'm asking, but I'm not giving myself the answer, but I have some doubt.
So, from a point of view, of an industrial point of view, the energetical crisis and the geopolitical problems that have come from the war, which is nearby, and also the COVID, have they in any way made some, or forced the industries to go back a bit, to go backwards in industrialization? You are an international group. Do you think that the markets, after this experience, after the war, etc., will transform into regionalized markets, and therefore technologies will be continental? At this point, we will have our model, our own type of technology. Asia will have theirs, America will have theirs. Or will we be like it used to be 5 years ago?
We speak about reshoring. I think reshoring, from what I've thinking about in the automotive world, is a big problem, because where the pandemic brought an evident show of fragility in the supply chain, it's not a fragility that's intrinsic. It's due to a context which has changed completely. We're not in the same context as 5 years ago, between war and pandemics and so on. So in this moment, the companies that are reassuring. There are, but they have another kind of way of understanding. It's true that the Italian companies are very important for components in automotive world, but if the energetic resources cost what it's costing at the moment, what is the competitivity that our companies can show to the Chinese and Indians? Second question, the gap of competitivity, which is really shocking with stratospheric numbers of prices of gas and electricity. How can they maintain that gap between I'll buy in Europe, but qualitatively they're a little bit more ahead? So from one side, some clients, look, I prefer to you make it here in Europe, but if you want, I'll make it at the price of of the Indians.
Yes.
It's not possible.
So at this point, the prices that are rising at all kinds of points, all the types of prices that are raising.
Price of the labor price is a different theme. We are a country, and you know, in Germany, when the Merkel said we can't do without Italy, it was because Italy was, because if they didn't have our pieces, they couldn't make the cars. I didn't think that this was a great piece of affection for Italy, but a little bit opportunistic. If I don't have the pieces from Italy, then I can't build. We can still be competitive. The cost of taxation, cost of people, are all elements are still giving us ways to be competitive, but the price of methane and electricity is too much. It's too competitive.
Your vision. Should you bet on a winning technology in a few years' time, connected, our car connected with autonomous driving?
For us, Comet has already started. We have invested in a project, Robbie Wire. It's a body of autonomous electrified body, so that we don't, we don't believe those kind of things, but in the future we will see. We put 6 million because to show how big it is. For Streparava, it's a lot of money. We don't have clients like Zavarese was saying that will come. We are waiting. We have our little digital bodywork with an autonomous drive, the version 4. As you said before, it can go only to compounds or restricted compounds. But if you say to me, what is the technology that our company has with motor parts, I can tell you that intelligence, which is artificial, which is linked to the vehicle.
An injection of digitalization into the mechatronics. Thank you, Paolo Steparava from the Steparava Group. To conclude the second panel, we have a speech from Roberto Vavassori, who is the business director of Brembo. Good morning. Certainly, what we see as the evolution of mobility in general, and automotive in particularly globally in the next 10 years, will follow the goals of sustainability and emission reduction according to the life cycle assessment, the LCA, a method also where there will be more connectivity between vehicles and infrastructure. We would then have a gradual increase in driving automation, while not necessarily reaching full autonomous driving. And from the point of view of vehicle use, a form of rental of the vehicle of use will be favored and not ownership as it is today for most users applies. At the level of production and markets, the growth of the automotive market will take place for more than 85% in Asia, while in the mature countries including
quindi
Europe
anche
and
l'Italia,
therefore also
vi sarà
Italy,
un mercato
there will be a
sostanzialmente di
market basically
sostituzione
of
sugli attuali valori
replacement
o
on
addirittura
the current
leggermente
values
in
or even
diminuzione.
slightly
La
decreasing.
stella polare di tutto
The
questo
North Star of
movimento è
this
certamente la
movement is
neutralità
certainly carbon
carbonica.
neutrality.
La filiera automotive
The
europea
European
e quindi anche
automotive
quella
supply chain,
italiana ne
therefore
sono
also the Italian
pienamente
one,
convinte
is
e
fully
stanno lavorando
convinced
in
of
questa
this,
direzione. Mi
and are
piace
working in this
sottolineare a
direction.
questo punto
I
che
like to emphasize this
l'automotive
point
è
that
un
automotive is a
sottoinsieme del più
subset of the
grande
larger
settore
energy
dell'energia.
sector.
Mi spiego meglio.
Let me explain
Se negli
further.
scorsi 150
If in the
anni
past
l'energia in
150
generale,
years,
e anche quella
energy in
elettrica,
general
è
and
stata
also
generata
electric
con l'uso
energy
di
has been
combustibili fossili,
generated with
la
the
stessa
use
cosa è
of fossil
accaduta per la
fuels,
mobilità.
the same thing has happened
Nella
for mobility.
transizione alla mobilità,
In the
soprattutto
transition to
elettrica,
mobility,
alla
especially
quale stiamo
electric
assistendo in
mobility,
in
that
questi
we're
anni,
witnessing in these years,
la condizione
the
necessaria,
necessary
il
condition,
prerequisito necessario e
therefore
non
the necessary
sufficiente,
and not
è che vi sia
sufficient
adeguata
prerequisite
disponibilità di
is that
energia
there is
elettrica
adequate availability
prodotta a
of
partire da
electricity
fonti
generated from
rinnovabili.
renewable sources.
Ora, facendo un po' di
Now,
matematica
doing a
molto
bit of
spiccia, di
mathematics, very
aritmetica,
basic
uno studio
arithmetic,
recente
a
di
recent study
NLX
by NLX
indica in poco più di
indicates at a
72
little over
terawattora
72
il fabbisogno
terawatt
annuo
hours the
addizionale di
additional
energia
annual electricity
elettrica per
requirement
alimentare
to
il
power
parco
the
italiano nella
Italian
sua
fleet
dimensione
at its
attuale,
current
quando sarà
size
convertito
when it is
interamente in
converted
auto
entirely to
elettriche.
electric cars.
Ricordo che un
I
terawatt
recall that a terawatt
equivale a
is
1000
equivalent to
miliardi
1
di
trillion
watt,
watts,
quindi 10 alla
so 10
dodicesima
to the 12th watt.
watt. Ehm, Questo per quanto riguarda l'utilizzo del
This is as far
veicolo,
as
ma
vehicle use is
il
concerned.
settore italiano
But the
della
Italian
produzione
power
di
generation
energia
sector
già oggi deve
already needs to
prevedere
be
di
planned to
convertire in
convert
fonti rinnovabili circa
about
200
200
terawattora,
terawatt
ovvero il
hours or
60% del totale
60%
annuo
of the total
di
annual
quanto
amount
consumiamo in Italia,
of what we
che
consume in
ancora
Italy,
non è generato con
which is
fonti
still not
rinnovabili.
generated from renewable sources.
Questo compito immane è
This
necessario
huge
per
task is
raggiungere
necessary
la
to achieve
neutralità
carbon
carbonica
neutrality
del sistema
of the
manifatturiero
Italian
italiano,
manufacturing
così come
system,
previsto
as envisaged by the
dalla
European
Commissione
Commission,
europea, meglio, dagli Stati
or rather by the
europei
European
che hanno
states,
votato all'unanimità
who
che al
unanimously voted
2050
that by
il nostro
250,
continente
our
sarà il
continent will be the
primo e
first
unico
and
continente a
only
raggiungere la
continent to
neutralità
achieve carbon
carbonica.
neutrality.
Vale la pena di sottolineare a
It is
questo
worth
punto
pointing
che
out that at this point,
l'80%
that
della
80%
CO2
of the
emessa
CO2
da
emitted
una
by a
normale
normal
azienda
automotive company
dell'automotive è costituito da
is
energia,
energy.
energia acquistata
Energy purchased
direttamente dai produttori di
directly from
energia
energy
dalle
producers,
utilities o
utilities,
energia incorporata
or energy
nei
incorporated
prodotti e
into
nei
the
componenti
products
che
and
acquista.
components it
Quindi ogni
purchases.
azienda del
So
nostro
each
settore
company in
può
our industry
direttamente
can
incidere
directly
solo, tra
affect, only in
virgolette,
quotes,
sul
20%
20% della propria
of
impronta
its carbon
carbonica.
footprint.
E poiché il
And
settore
since the automotive
dell'automotive è
sector
impegnato a
is committed
raggiungere
to achieving
l'obiettivo di neutralità
the goal
carbonica
of
nel
carbon neutrality
2040
in
in Europa e nel
2040
mondo,
in
e
Europe and
ognuna
worldwide,
delle nostre aziende ha
and
firmato
each of our
impegni vincolanti con i
companies has
propri clienti
signed
automotive,
binding
è
commitments with the
chiaro che
automotive
dobbiamo
customers,
cercare
it is
già
clear
da
that we have to
oggi
look already today
fonti di
for
energia
renewable energy
rinnovabili
sources
capaci di
capable of moving
portarci
us
verso questo
towards
obiettivo.
this goal.
Se poi volessimo
Then,
parlare
if we
anche
also
di
wanted to
idrogeno
talk about
verde,
green
che oggi
hydrogen,
è un tema
which is a very trendy and
molto
very
trendy e
fashionable
molto di
topic
moda,
today,
ovviamente
obviously
verde perché è
green,
prodotto a partire da fonti
produced
rinnovabili,
from renewable
probabilmente
resources,
dovremmo aggiungere altri
we would
50
probably have to add
terawattora
another 50 terawatt
all'anno a
hours
tale
per year
scopo,
for the served
ovviamente di
purpose.
energia
Of
rinnovabile.
course, renewable energy.
Mettendo insieme i tre numeri che vi ho detto,
Putting the
quindi
three numbers
70,
together I told you,
200
so
e
70,
50,
200, and
arriviamo a
50,
un
we
totale di
arrived at a total of
320
320
terawattora,
terawatt
che
hours,
equivale su per giù all'odierno
which is
consumo
roughly
totale
equivalent to
annuo
today's
di
annual
energia
energy
in
consumption in
Italia.
Italy.
Elettrificare progressivamente il
Progressively
parco circolante
electrifying the
italiano,
Italian
cosa che stiamo
car fleet,
facendo in
which we have
questi
been doing
anni,
in
ha
recent
quindi
years,
senso se
therefore makes sense
contemporaneamente
if at
si
the same
aggiunge un
time we
equivalente
add an
incremento
equivalent
di energia
increase in
rinnovabile,
renewable energy,
altrimenti l'emissione
otherwise
di
the
CO2 è
CO2
solamente
emission is
spostata,
only
così come
displaced,
il consumo di fonti
as is the
fossili e
consumption
più
of
o
fossil
meno con il
fuels,
medesimo
and more or
rendimento.
less at the same yield.
Perfect. Thank you, Roberto Vavassori, who is the Business Development Director of Brembo.
We have reached the end of our long morning, which has helped us to explain about sustainable mobility and electric mobility. Here we have reached the conclusions, and I would like to call first Alberto Piantoni, who is the CEO of Miglia, and then Domenico Sturabotti, who is the director of Simbola Foundation. Alberto, what can we say? We have spoken about a scenario, a present scenario. We've imagined what the future will be. We've also spoken about the problems of the future. It's not so linear, this innovation.
Well, and first of all, thank you to everybody. It seemed like a frank debate. It happened what we thought was going to happen, that the industry, our industry, one that counts the pieces. I was a metal mechanic in my origins. It has posed a problem. But why today we have to throw away our experience? Let's try to reconvert our experience today, because we can, to make it efficient what is already there. That's a good point. But they didn't say, don't look forward. They just said, we have a big theme on energy, a very big theme. It's a huge theme on this debate. So there is an infrastructure that we must put our head in, breaking also some prejudices, probably, but the technology can help us. So the message that I got from the university is this. It's true. We are. They didn't say it expressly, but we are on one side, but they're not really. But there is the possibility to create from the energy something new, even European-wise. And this, for me, is a theme. It's true that we import, and we have only 30% renewable system of energy. Our real challenge today is that we have this necessity. How can we cover this necessity in war themes, in themes which are very competitive? How can the Italian industry, because that's what we're speaking about actually, how can it be competitive starting from an energetic part that doesn't really exist?
In order to be able to train for the Olympics.
But the other suggestion, which I always say I don't understand about cars and about automotives, even if I'm the CEO of Miglia. But the other theme that Salaresi said was about the autonomous driving in the great centers. Sooner or later, this commodity will pass. This commodity will pass. Today, the young people don't think of the car as we thought about it when we were young, in the 70s and 60s. For them, the car today is, they don't even have a license. It's a service. And probably in that area, in that autonomous from A to B of people and the goods can become a piece of a resolution to the problem. Then there's the whole emotional part that Savarese will show, the supercars, the red cars at the Politecnico. That can be even the 500 Abarth, but also the Ferrari. And then there's a general theme of the long trips. If in that time the long trips are more efficient, the Euro 6, but why can't we use that one? I'm not exclusive to excluding anything. As Miglia, and I think we really did come to the point in this day, is to put in confrontation all ideas, because we believe that the infrastructure is technological, but also the infrastructure of the means is still open to where the experience that we have gathered in our province, in our region, cannot be put aside. This is one theme. The other side, I think everyone understood, the new players will be the digitalizers, the new players of the automotive world, I think I've understood, will be the Google. Will those people? So these people, maybe it's better to reason now with them. It's better to find a synergy now with them. That's the pump. That's to add digital inside our strong metal mechanical roots. This is just to speak it that way. The way I see it, this is the challenges that we will follow. Then there are other themes that we cannot, the impact, ecological and so on, that we cannot. That what Paolo said, and I'm totally agree with the ways and with times, agreed upon and thought upon. Yes, in my life it's good to throw your heart in one way, but let's not trip all over it. Let's try and get to the obstacle and solve it in a good way. This is what I think I understood from the day today. Dr. Sturabotti, I'm asking you an operation, a qualitative operation. You obviously followed these 4 years of Green Talk. Have we managed to make some step ahead in this debate?
I think we're at the beginning. If we look at the 4 years, I think of the revolution, we're still at the beginning of the epochal change. We're still at the beginning. In the various discussions, I was thinking of the game book, where there's the construction of the digital, which is a slow construction. There's a slow line with a lot of errors. Now we have to accelerate some things immediately. We need time to mature, to know what is good, to know what to invest, because we need a lot of energy. And we think of mobility, which isn't a theme of reprojecting cars or electric cars, but in order to replan all of the mobility in all its forms. Thinking of the big designers, we're speaking about how he can see in the future a much more complex system in where the supercars will still be the ones with the air blowing in our hair, more as electrical domestic things, and all other kinds of forms.
Not even the design will be
also
like
the
that.
design. We think of mobility as an experience of people, which in some way, which we've done in different ways. Today we have different silos of mobility, which converge, that have to find a new form. The theme is in this type of mobility. This is the clear theme. Then, of course, I heard before, we're at a crossroads. It is very difficult because we have a big market on one side, of which we are we're a world player. And then we have the electric side, which is very small. So, of course, we have a big fear to take on this road, which is very big for us. Then there are innovation themes, which 800,000 places of work, which will arrive in Europe. So we mustn't lose the train now that we lost with the digital sense. If we have new opportunities, not only for electricity, but for mobility in general, we have to take them. Many companies which you heard before, today work with electricity, such as Tesla. If we think of the Italian companies that make components for Tesla or other electric cars, let's think of the design in Piemonte and in Milan and in Lombardy. A lot of the designs are made there, a lot of the parts are made there. So also the planning and the manufacturing. We cannot be the only thing, but we must also do this.
Thank you, Alberto Piantoni, CEO of Miglia, and Domenico Sturabotti of Simbola, Director. We have arrived at the end of this very busy morning, but very interesting morning. Thank you also to all the people who wanted to stay with us up until now. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.